Now, as I had mentioned earlier, this car sits a little high. So to start off, I'm going to show you guys how I'm going to lower the front. I started by making a little bitty notch right above the wheel post peg thing. The idea was to use that as a reference to measure from, but when I cut this off, I realized it's kind of a hollow casting. And even better, the holes are right in the dead center of these parts. So I will be using those as a reference point for all the measuring. Now that this has been sanded flat, I can go in and start taking some measurements with my highly calibrated eyeball. Now the gap between the top of the tire and the bottom of the fender well was right at 4mm. I don't want the tire to rub, so I'm going to do everything at 3.5mm. I do not trust glue alone for this, so I'm going to drill them out and I'm going to pin them. And before I glue this in, I'm just going to double check my measurements. This is looking right at about 3.5mm, which is exactly where I want to be. So now I just repeat for the other side. And as a little sanity check, I'm going to measure just to make sure they're the same height on both sides. The top of that pin was sitting right at the 1cm mark. And on this side, we're going to be sitting right at the top of the 10mm mark. I've never been all that good at math, but you know, that's close enough for me. I'll take it. I'm also not into the cambered look, the stance. That's just stupid. So I'm going to make sure these are as close to 90 as I can. It's a little bit difficult because I put a lot of glue on these, so I can't get right up into the corner as much as I wanted to. Then one last check, I'm just going to make sure they're parallel using the grid on my cutting mat. Paint is the next step, so from here on out it's going to be some basic assembly because everything is going to be painted mostly the same color. This will be hidden, but it might as well make things line up. Why not? We're professionals, aren't we? Now I'm deviating from the instructions a little bit, as these will all be painted the same color. I'm going to install them now. The instructions say to add these on after you install the engine. But if you just slide the engine assembly straight through from the back, it all fits. So might as well glue them in now. Now I want the shocks to be more of a stainless steel color, so I am painting the shocks and the wheel backs in a Tester's silver metallic. Which is kind of an oxymoron because silver is basically metallic gray. You guys have seen me use this before in the past though. It is an almost 100% perfect match to the kit chrome that comes in Tamiya and Fujimi. So I highly recommend you guys have some on hand for any touch-ups you need to do when you break those parts off the sprues. And for the rest of the chassis, I'm using that same Apollo silver that I had used to paint the engine. Only this time, I'm just going to leave it as it is. I'm not going to knock it down with any dull coat or anything. Now I'd wanted to break up all that stainless steel, so I went over the coils with a black dry brush just to kind of make them stand out a little bit. Now once those are installed, you're just going to sandwich it together from this front kind of bulkhead thing. And yeah, it's not a good fit. I'm kind of glad that not a single bit of this will be visible once the car is assembled. Actually, if you guys want to be lazy, just paint it all silver. Nobody will know because the vast majority of all this is hidden. All you'll just see is the bottom. And that's the same reason I didn't clean up the sink marks here. It's all going to be hidden. This is what I was saying earlier about how the engine, if you just slide it in straight from the back, you can install it after you got most of this chassis assembled. Now that did come back to bite me in the ass because I forgot that that radiator hose has to go inside of the engine compartment. So when I popped that in there, the engine, it was kind of under spring tension and it just didn't want to stay in place. So I'm going to hold this all under the spring clamp here while the glue dries. And this, my friends, is most of what scale modeling is, watching paint and glue dry. Yeah, I'm already bored. I'm gonna go get a drink. As you can see, the hub for the wheel, it's got a lot of play in there. So I wanted this to be as centered as I could. So, to help me, I'm gonna use the wheel itself as a jig. So I'm going to essentially just tack weld this in place with a little dab of Tamiya Extra Thin. So once it's had time to dry a little bit, I'm just going to pop that wheel out. So I'm going to go back and glue that in. I'm just going to double check to make sure that is centered. And whoa, look how off-centered that is. Yikes. You guys see that lower control arm there that this is going to kind of lever into? My original plan was to kind of cut the shocks and bend those up to help me lower the rear suspension. Yeah, this old brittle plastic, it just kept breaking. So I gotta find a different way to lower the back of this thing. I have a plan, you'll see it in the next video. In the meantime though, you guys get to watch me struggle trying to install this upper control arm to the viewfinder on my camera. And it's for that same reason I didn't even try to do this piece. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 parts that need to align. The same thing as usual. Just going to hold this in place here while the glue has a little bit of time to dry. I guess I'll go get another drink. I should also mention, I don't really assemble in any kind of order. I assemble when paint and glue's dry, which is why this is out of sync. I have the exhaust over in the paint booth right now drying, so I'm going to work on these wheels and tires. So basically just trim down that mohawk the best you can, and then go down and sand everything flush. Now, one benefit about these tires being nylon instead of rubber is if you don't like the kind of scuffed up look and you want them to look factory new, the oils from your hand will clear all that up. During the unboxing, I had mentioned a rumor, so let's see if that's true. Now, I'm not going to push that all the way down because I still want to be able to pull it out. But yeah, a poly cap will fit in these wheels. So if you guys want an awesome set of 2-piece OZ wheels with some fairly decent tires, I guess kid bashing this kit is where to get them. I guess now is a good time to also talk about the front brakes. And as you can see, there's no caliper. It's tiny, very well hidden. So I'm going to go to my stash of aftermarket parts to see what I could do to make this look a little bit better. These are the brakes from an old Dodge Viper kit. I was originally going to use these on a VTS Ram, but went with some resin cast rotors. Now luckily, Revell uses the same size hub, so the modifications I did to make this fit it will fit these wheels as well. Now once I get those things painted up, I'm willing to bet these are going to look fairly decent behind that wheel. Alright, so paint's dry. Let's get back to putting this thing together. I got a little bit of Tamiya extra thin on this to essentially just kind of hold it in place but not lock it in, because we got a little bit of adjusting to do. Now with the intake and a charge cooler installed, I'm just going to kind of clock that turbo just to make it mount up. We get just one last thing here to wrap up in the engine bay, and that is the throttle body and air cleaner assembly. It is an extremely fiddly little piece. It has to mount both to the side of the engine bay and the compressor side of the turbo. Even if you guys do everything right, it's probably not going to sit in there straight like it is supposed to. But that's okay, because the air cleaner assembly is going to cover most of that up. We got just one last thing to do, and that's get this exhaust installed. And it's probably the only thing on this kit that actually fits right. It clocks from the exhaust side of the turbo and then just mounts to the back of the transmission tail housing. That is it for this one though, guys. And at the moment, as of right now, I'm about halfway through the interior, so look for that video coming out in the next day or two. Now that being said, I got to get some of the YouTube fine print out of the way. You know how that goes. Like, subscribe, and share. Thank you. It really, truly means a lot to me if you guys do that.